Welcome to Prime Venture Partners Podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs looking to build and grow their startups. Learn about uncommon strategies and common traps from makers and doers of startup ecosystem.
I think you can absolutely build out a SaaS business from anywhere in the world. From a belief faith perspective, I think it's absolutely possible, given that every distribution is so digital today. However, the first thing that you need to know as a founder is you need to intimately understand your customer and your market, which means you need to understand how US buyers buy, what kind of content they want to read when they make a buying decision, what is their sales process, what is the emotional aspect involved in that sale? Every sale has something. To us, it looks like a transaction, but whenever a user commits to pay you, there is an emotional element in the back of their minds. If you're a developer tool, all the developer is thinking about, how do I make my life easier? How do I build scalable system, right? A lot of other functions, particularly in the US, and this is an insight that I kind of garnered over the last 6 months to a year, everybody wants to show to their bosses that they took a right decision, and that decision in terms of a software purchase has resulted in business efficiencies.
Service magic comes to mind, Amit. The Disney's book on service magic essentially talks exactly what you said about giving that unexpected wow. And with regard to design, that's what holds true. Interestingly, a lot of the top designers have dabbled in magic. Whether you go to Bruce Tognazini or even Edward Tufte, you see a lot of them having some connect to magic, and you see that coming through the whole info design world that has now morphed into user experience. Well, somebody like Amazon comes to mind when you say user experience with magic, because they are working not just on getting you what you know you want, but also trying to get you things that you still don't know you want.
If you are actually taking a long-term view of thinking through about the space, I don't think the excitement around this space changes, the opportunity around this space changes. In fact, it does open up in many ways new potential, business models, new potential way of, in the post-COVID arena, addressing the new normal of travel. So there could be interesting, niches that could emerge out of, potentially emerge out of this. So I would actually encourage that people to continue to keep evaluating. I mean, you have to evaluate the space relative to many other spaces that would be open when you're thinking about starting a new sector or a new startup. I mean, you can pick up any sector, and a lot of the people, there will be always tendency to go for a more hot sector. But I think for the evaluation criteria should not be limited to the crisis hit industry, should be more thinking the space, as if there was no crisis, and more from a long-term standpoint.
But over time, you've got to keep on listening to the customer. So when we raised venture capital in the year 2000, we said, hey, why not add a field sales force and go out and meet clients? We were earlier selling by direct mail. And so we began to hire field salespeople. And, within a year or so, we had over 100. Within 2 years, we had over 200 across 9 or 11 offices around the country. And what we did at that time was that we started a Yahoo group of all the salespeople and the tech people and the product people and the senior management. And we told the salespeople, whatever the customer tells you, you please put it out on this group. So we had 200 sales guys, each posting messages. I met this customer. He's happy with the product, but he's saying, why don't you add this feature? What about this? This it's not solving this problem. So we were getting continuous feedback from clients, from customers, from the salespeople, saying this is what happened today, right? And that gave us a repository of ideas. And if the same idea was coming from 8, 10, 12 different people consistently, we would go out and execute it. And therefore, essentially, customers are telling us what to do and what they wanted, and we just did it. Okay, and that's how the product improved all the time. And so a lot of the subsequent innovations that we did, was simply customer feedback and almost live customer feedback, same day feedback, next day feedback from salespeople on this Yahoo group. saying it's a simple idea, but it really gave us a lot of new ideas on how to on product improvement, which we executed well.
No, absolutely. So I think there are lots of things happening. And I think the way entrepreneurs, if I was out there right now, I would be thinking about these things as platforms and these things as opportunities to build with and build on top of, right? So we'll come to that. But basically, look, I think there are a few niches where we're seeing tremendous behavior shift. So mobile gaming is definitely one of those which is going to be, just as we're talking about music and video as independent categories, I think we'll talk about gaming broadly as an independent category. And in fact, we already should be. And so what we've noticed is that, so we're investors in the startup called MPL, Mobile Premier League. And we came in just after Sequoia Capital had invested there. MPL has basically caught on to this massive trend where, they took casual games and made them competitive. And that, again, it's one of those, once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? It's one of those ideas. And the kind of growth that they're seeing is phenomenal because it's instantly now become a social experience as opposed to being kind of a solitary experience. So ideas around that, I think, are going to be big. I think similarly, there's a large trend around, again, you got to think about it saying, listen, I've got 100, 200, 300 million users in India who are used to consuming content through their phones. So what might they do now, which they wouldn't have done before? So I think communities online in India, which are more designed from an India first perspective, I think are a very large opportunity because, one of the things people do initially when they come online is they do entertainment, but then after that, they want to start engaging with their, with their fellow people intellectually, right? Whether that's, depending on the kind of things that interest a person, it could be around entertainment, sports, it could be around education, it could be around career stuff, it could be lots of different things. So I think India-specific communities don't exist. To an extent, they exist on Facebook, but I think they could be an independent product.
Realized that one of the major issues that many entrepreneurs I interacted with, and especially that was true for me in variety of contexts, was this whole thing about passion. It's a very tricky thing. I believe passion is really like an edge of the sword, which is it can go both ways. It's definitely required to do anything interesting, but a lot of time passion leads us to building things that only the builder really wants. And that was certainly, my own experience when I was building initial things. So the whole point of inverted passion and what I recommend entrepreneurs now on getting good ideas, instead of becoming passionate about an idea and spending your weeks and months into building it, one should be passionate about discovering what other people are passionate about. And I know it sounds complicated, but the idea is really simple, that rather than falling in love with a particular idea and spending a lot of time, because that comes with tons of cognitive biases and you'll discover too late that nobody else wants. So rather, one should be passionate about this meta level of activity, which is finding what other people are passionate about. If other people are passionate about XYZ and you're able to provide a really great solution for that XYZ, then you're done. And that's why it's called inverted passion, that you need to, invert your passion towards just discovering what others are passionate about and not what you are passionate about.
For account aggregator, a good example is a bank account. I deposit money, I withdraw money, I write a check, I make a payment. All of that information sits within the bank account.
Right.
These are transactions made by me, which sit in the bank. Another example would be telephone calls. Telecom company knows what calls I'm making. They give me a monthly statement, but the data sits with them. Now, this data is quite useful and valuable, both to me and to other people who might want to provide services to me as well. And what an account aggregator does is, in some sense, it's saying that you as a user has rights to this data and that the service provider should be able to provide it to you in a format that is usable by you and by others.
Okay.
So essentially, what the account aggregator does is it provides a mechanism for that data to be brought to you under your control. So every service provider in the financial space, in the regulated space, is required to now provide this data to you.
Okay.
And that's what the account aggregator does. It provides a mechanism to do that.
So can you give an example? So what's the use case for this, which was envisaged initially?
A few use cases. A simple one is lending. Today, when I go to a bank to apply for a loan, the bank asks me for data, bank statements. And I typically go to these banks, take printouts and give it to them. They go ahead and digitize it again and then make some sense of their data. Now, what could happen is that with this new infrastructure that's created, I could go there and tell all my banks that, hey, this is a bank that I want to send my account statements to. Could you please make that happen?
Okay.
And then I give my consent to the account aggregator. The account aggregator takes it to all the banks where I have accounts and make sure that the data gets transmitted to the bank that I want to take a loan from.
It's a super interesting time for multiple reasons. The first is that governments are, even before we get to regulation, governments are providing big stimulus packages. But at the same time, we are beginning to see the role that platforms play, because platforms are having to provide big stimulus packages as well in their own ways, because platforms are market makers, much like the government is. And if you look at what Airbnb, for example, is doing, it's provided this whole package for hosts who are going through this crisis. There's going to be monetary help for them. Airbnb on its own is not in a good position. It had to take a down round at a very high interest rate, 11 to 12%, but it still has to, in order to protect and sustain its ecosystem and not end up with mass foreclosures, it has to provide this kind of a package. And we're seeing something similar with the restaurant industry as well, right? With Zomato, for example, in India, running a campaign to help restaurants, Yelp and OpenTable trying to do their part for restaurants. So the first piece that I see that's really going to take shape is that when platforms realize how much they need the ecosystem, they're going to start acting more like custodians of the ecosystem, because without the ecosystem, the platform does not survive in these cases. So this is something we've not seen to the same extent in the past. We're going to see that happen much more through the crisis, and then when the ecosystem gets conditioned, beyond it as well. So that's one big shift.
A couple of things. One is, I think, understanding what your customer needs and wants rather than what your solution is doing. I think starting from the outside in is very, very important. You might have a brilliant idea, but if it doesn't have a customer for it, it doesn't have people interested in it, then it won't really succeed. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to focus on their solution rather than the business problem that their customers are facing. If you're building a product, experience is so important, and being able to create that experience when you're even selling it. So the prototypes and things are so important. All of us have got very spoiled now with our own devices and the kind of experiences those give us. So all of us expect that from whatever we get around us now. So being able to actually understand, again, the psyche of your end customer and designing things for them correctly is quite important, perhaps much, much more so now than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago. So those are, I think, two things. And the third is that the fail fast, I think, is very, very important. Figure out what is working and what's not quickly so that you can adapt. And adaptability is so critical, again, to be able to change and not be stuck with what you have been doing so far, but adapt to what the market requires.
I still think that you need to sit down, you need to focus on this and think about how you're going to get your brand narrative out. Because if you don't, and here's the important thing, if you don't shape the narrative, somebody is doing it. So whether you are tweeting or not, somebody is tweeting about you.
Absolutely. So going back to, the kind of reticence of founders to do this, one, of course, is time. Second, maybe you're saying sort of personal interest or lack thereof. Are there some other reasons why people don't go out there and do that? Maybe people are vulnerable. Maybe there's something else, right? And are there tips and tricks to sort of overcome that?
There are two things, right? I think you have a set of founders who don't think this is important enough because they are so occupied with building the business, and, all respect to them. But I just want to say that it will get harder if you don't control it now. If you think that you can put off building your brand and take it up after your next fundraise or your next team hire, you're making it harder for yourself. You need to start today. How much effort you put into it you can calibrate that depending on at what stage you are, but you need to start today. That's number one. Number two, I think I've met a lot of founders who are actually sold on the idea. They understand the importance of brand building, but I think they are afraid of being judged. And that's very natural. I mean, as a founder, you are being judged and called out every day on 100 things. Do you really want to add one more to the pile? So what I would say in answer to your question about what can they do about it, I would say that anything you put out, right? Anything you say about your brand or the ecosystem to which your brand belongs, if it's adding value for even one person, if one person reads what you have said and takes away something from it, and it can be something to do with the industry that you're in, it can be something, a learning he or she has had from what you've written, then you have done immense service to the ecosystem.
In my opinion, it's okay to start either ways as long as you know how to get to the other end. If you do not have the capability to engineer and you're just making do for finding product market fit, you'll find product market fit, but then the speed at which you need to be able to build needs to be solid. I think of building technology as a constant evolution alongside the product, not disparate from the product. So wherever in areas where you found product market fit, you better also find engineering fit. Right? We don't necessarily talk about engineering fit or technology fit. At reasonable levels of demand, your technology should start becoming scalable, just like your demand has become scalable. Till the time your demand is not scalable and is not scaling, it's okay for you to experiment. It's okay for you to make do with MVPs, both in terms of product as well as tech. But as soon as you have PMF, you better have technology fit, because then the demand doesn't wait, and we have enough skeletons lying in the internet space of organizations that hit product market fit but did not hit technology fit. MySpace is my favorite example of a company that hit product market fit so well that they collapsed, or thanks to lack of technology, they collapsed.
You should operate in your area of competence. So I think Buffett talks about it. You should know what your circle of competence is. And so in private markets, there are some things we know and some things we don't know. And same thing in public market. We talked about like how investing in agri-feeds is not the smartest thing for someone like me to do on public markets. Similarly, when we are looking at tech as prime, as you know, we focus on companies where tech is like a very key differentiator, very key scaling component, where the team understands tech deeply and the DNA is about that. And same thing goes on the public market side. To me, diversification is not going into tech and non-tech. To me, diversification in a public portfolio is really about different tech. And so that's one thing which I would say I've taken directly from that standpoint. The second thing I would say is that in tech companies, you cannot focus on bottom line profits early. In private companies, the same thing. We are looking at growth rates and profits come later. But in the early stage and fast growing public companies as well, it is the same thing. You cannot actually start focusing on profits early, especially true, for example, in SaaS. In SaaS, it's a recurring revenue stream which comes later. So you'll see that it took some time for public markets to realize that. So 2-3 years ago, the SaaS market, public companies were actually not that highly valued. And now the market caps of all those companies have actually zoomed up as people have understood the value of a recurring revenue stream. And finally is market size. So market size really limits, a small market size limits the total size of the company. And what, as we know, Amit, you and I, when we look at companies, we focus a lot about the market size, because it's not just the market size today, it is the market size later with all the option value that this company has to enter those new possible markets. So it's not just a simple spreadsheet exercise on market size. The same thing is true for public markets, which is the companies which have a lot of option value to not only just enter one market, but a lot of other adjacent markets which might be new and emerging, is a lot more exciting company with a lot more potential for better returns.
Leadership layer and the founders and the org design are the hardware of the company. We say that the company operating system is the software for the company. This is the part that allows you to function and run the company really, really effectively. And there are, I think, several parts to it. First is, once you've got the big goals identified, how do you make sure that those goals are now translating into very clear execution roadmaps for everybody in the company? We very strongly advocate the use of OKRs, for example, in being able to convert your strategy into execution deliverables. We strongly advocate the use of working sessions and decision sessions for companies to be able to debottleneck decision making. We also say that if you don't have a chief of staff, please hire a chief of staff, somebody who can run this entire process for you very effectively. The second element of company operating system is what we call the business finance intervention. I think you've got OKR set up. How do you make sure that the core metrics of the company are drilled down to a level that can actually be executed by people on the ground? So taking your L0 metrics and drilling them down to the L3, L4 level in terms of input metrics is what we call the L0 to L3 cascade, run very effectively in our experience in companies like Flipkart, CureFit, by the team called the business finance team. If you don't have a team like that, strong advice, please put in a team like that to help you very, very early on.
The reality is it's at Series B, you hit the first barriers in terms of what do I do next to start facing serious problems. So all the initial excitement of product market fit giving you velocity, that carries you through Series A and B. If you build a great company, things take care of themselves. You feel, boss, even if I don't come to work, the company will still grow. At Series B, you have to start answering the questions of, hang on, I'm starting to run out of suppliers. Or that first early blush of 100% quarter-on-quarter growth, getting to the first million customers, that's now done. Now, where do I go from here? And now that the reality is expanding product market fit and saying, what is the business that will scale 10 times from here is what we call business design in very simple terms, which may mean now to supply at the same quality, you have to go more full stack, for example, or you have to invest in tech on the supply chain side. What was the e-cart moment for Flipkart? So e-cart moment is an example of a business design shift well into product market fit on e-commerce. So that's the business design piece. The org design piece, Amit, is a very, very simple question. We said, okay, you want to achieve this over the next year. This is the business design that you need to pursue. Now answer one simple question. You're shifting now from a focus on just growth to growth plus profitability. Is that same org going to be good enough that you had last year? And what astonishes me is that orgs actually don't change by default. Everyone carries the same org year after year when the business context is changing so dramatically. So we just insist on asking this question. Is the org you had last year going to help you do what you want to accomplish next year?
Time to pivot again, even though we were fatigued. It was very clear that we were just going back to the principle that we had always agreed on, and there were no insecurities to deal with at that time. So that was part one. I think we extended that to all our employees, and we were a small team, 15 people. We had always had this culture where our core and only cultural belief was that you treat others as adults and the rest shall follow. And so therefore for us, for me, it actually became very clear that the next 9 to 10 months were going to be really challenging, both from a fundraising and potentially an exit standpoint. And we took the most radical approach to it. And the most radical approach was that we had an all hands meeting like we did every Monday and told every single one of our employees that the down part of the roller coaster ride that you had signed up for was about to begin. And we will actually split forces where my co-founder would actually work with all of you to come up with a new pivot. And you'll have to put your heart and soul into that to make that work. Well, I'll go out and actually try to sell the company or raise financing for the next 9 months. And I've done that before multiple times, and I know that we'll actually get failure after failure, rejection after rejection. And the only thing that I could do as the founder who had built this kind of a company was to come back to you every Monday and tell you who rejected us last week. And that's going to be brutal after a while. So if you want to leave, this is the best time. And of those 15, one employee left at that time, but everyone else kind of stuck through. And I realized that we had basically set hardcore expectations from the remaining 14 people about what's going to happen in the next 9 months. And that really helped us a lot.
Kernel of the idea of building stuff that subsequently over a few iterations becomes an institution or an organization is actually within the founding team itself. Meaning the DNA of the founding team essentially manifests itself over time and through multiple morphings into the value system of the organization. So therefore, to be able to express it in a form that is tangible, in other words, how do I manifest values, culture, attitudes, ways of doing things, processes, the treatment of people, conflict management, respect, etc., when it is intangible. But the tangible manifestation of that is quote unquote encapsulated in the culture, right? So the point being, all of this cannot be grafted. It is that which is natural to the founding team. So one should not try and be something that you are not. Be who you are, be honest. So the cognitive dissonance within the founding team reduces. And if you are saying, look, I'm building this company to make money and shitloads of money very quickly. Nothing wrong with it, as long as you're clear about it, as long as you're honest about it, and then go about to make that happen. On the other hand, if you're saying, look, I'm really building something as a legacy. that will last 100 years even after I, as a founder, disappear. The approach is very different.
I think broadly, first big step, which is not very far off, is that we will have a very powerful, very knowledgeable, extremely capable machine that can do diagnosis, that can understand history of the patient in a very detailed way, and completely do differential diagnosis, have treatment plans ready, can read X-ray reports or blood reports. And this is, I think, in my view, short term. That is like next 3 to 4 years. And most of the work that doctors do in terms of data collection and analysis is going to be done by the machine and presented. And today, I would say to a large extent in some specialties and conditions, on MFine, it's already happening, for example. Not to boast of MFine, but I'm saying that this is just getting mainstream very fast, right? Regular cases, basically, the machine can at least diagnose and suggest that to the doctor. Healthcare in general, if you speak, we still believe that model that even in the long term, it's kind of an assistive technology. AI as an assistant is a way more effective way to combine accuracy, scalability of the machine, and intuition and creativity of the doctor.
If you're an entrepreneur moving from India to the US, be ready for your burn to go up catastrophically when you start a team in the US. So obviously that's the bad thing, but there are a lot of good things about it. So I'll talk about why we did it, what are the reasons you should do it, and how we went about doing it. I think the challenge for an Indian software as a service entrepreneur trying to crack enterprise in Bangalore is there is not enough of a talent pool available here. That is one big challenge. We are still swimming in a very small pond. There do not exist as many enterprise software as a service companies in Bangalore or Chennai or anywhere in India as they do in New York City or the Bay Area. Secondly, even if there are people, they're not proximate to customers. So if you're trying to build a large business, you need to have your sales leadership, your marketing leadership, your CS leadership very proximate to customers. They should be able to jump on a flight, go visit a customer, because that is expected from you. And the third thing is that people also have seen a lot more scale. So there's obviously talent pool and proximity and scale. SaaS is a science, it's not an art. So once you hit a particular critical mass, it's just about following a playbook. And unfortunately, we don't have those playbooks here. But there are people out there who have playbooks or who've been part of playbooks who can immensely help you, right? So that's a kind of the reasons why we did that pivot or transition.
So the number one thing you need to look at in fintech is regulation. So if you are in payment, you need to know what NPCI is doing, what NPCI is going to do. If you are in lending, you need to know what RBI is doing, what are all the regulations in it. If you are in mutual funds, you need to know what SEBI is doing. You need to know, if you're in insurance, you need to know what the insurance regulator is doing. So the regulation is a very, very big part of any startup in India. Now, the larger players have an inherent advantage here because they have armies of people who've been managing the regulators and understanding this for decades. As a new entrant in other countries, you might be able to get away by like flouting regulations, like some of the transportation guys did or Airbnb did in the US, where you just kind of wing it and then you get some scale and then deal with the regulator later. I would not advocate that in India because regulators are pretty strict in India and it's very hard to wing it in India. So I would say regulation first, understand what the pitfalls are. Second is you need to understand the existing incumbents. And especially in finance, the incumbent is usually a bank of some sort. And Indian banks, especially the private sector banks, tend to be very, very well run. And they might not be the cutting edge in technology, but they really know what they're doing. So this is not one of those things where you just kind of thumb your nose at them and say, I'm going to, crush you and so on and so forth. So you need to have the respect and also understand what they bring to the table and find a way to sort of partner with them. In a lot of cases, one has to partner with them. You realize that sooner or later. Or if you're going to compete with them, understand exactly how you're competing with them. So the understanding the ecosystem, understanding the regulator, and understanding some of the nitty-gritty operational details like KYC, for example. In almost every form of fintech, there will be some KYC and anti-money laundering, understanding fraud. Fraud is a super important part of all of this. So it's not just about having the best machine learning technology or best marketing team and so on and so forth. One has to understand in finance some of this nitty-gritty of all of these things.
I think from the beginning itself, right, our product vision was always that we wanted to build a platform from where the CF or the finance team can manage 100% of business spends. And Yes, we started with employee expense management, but vendor was a very obvious evolution of the product. Second thing is, imagine if you define a budget. If I define a budget, say my marketing team cannot spend more than 3 crores in a quarter, hypothetically. Now, in that case, the marketing team will actually consume that budget through their hotel bookings, through their flight bookings, through their food expenses, but they'll also utilize the same budget to pay to their event manager as well. And that payment would ideally be done through an invoice. So when you're helping the corporates to manage their budgets very efficiently, you have to make sure that you are covering each and every transaction type, which potentially can be part of that budget. When we started with expense management, that we have to bring our invoice solution. We're officially launching it now, but there are many large corporates who are already actively using the product.
So I think design definitely for any digital product or anything, I would say, plays an important role. In case of quizzes, we were even dealing with an audience which varied from very young teachers to, teachers in their late 60s and 70s. We always felt that our design should be simple enough where anyone can come without thinking about it, without getting any training, start using it. So there, I would say that design definitely plays a very crucial role in this whole process. And I feel the love which we received there, definitely those visual elements gets the classrooms excited about it.
Look, there's always change. There's constant change, and trying to figure out how we respond either proactively or reactively, depending on where we are to the change, is key. Look, I'm not afraid to fail. I'm afraid to do nothing. So I'd rather think about the ways to attack something and then go about it. And if failure happens, it happens. And you learn, and then you figure out how to move forward. In setting the strategy, choosing a course of action, one of the things I did with the leadership of my team was to get them really bought in and leverage the collective wisdom versus just my thoughts on where we should go. I think by getting that, I've got the buy-in from the team. And that actually gives me stability, because at any point, there are people who are reinforcing you and supporting your strategy within your team. And it's not just you propping up a strategy. It is much more powerful. And so we were able to achieve that, get the consensus, if not consensus across everybody, but across enough of a majority. So I had buy-in from the leadership team to take the company in the direction forward. And that helps sustain it, because it's the team that's interacting with everyone else in the company. And they have to be the ones reinforcing our direction, reinforcing the strategy. I've got their buy-in. Then I've got that continuity going and ability to make some tough decisions and make our way through some, wrong turns and where we have to make corrections.
The millennials are becoming the decision makers, and somewhere the whole interest for the millennials is more about the experience, more about the access to the better and better options. And that's where the trend in auto is also showing that the consumers are now probably changing and upgrading faster than ever. And optionally, they are using a lot of financing options being available in the market. The old age way of owning an asset, keeping it for yourself for 5, 6, 7 years has gone long back. And I think the auto industry is hence facing interesting challenges as well as interesting opportunities have been created, where somehow players like us feel like it's an innovative opportunity to come out with something interesting in this year.
I would think just getting your customer satisfaction score. Now, there are multiple ways in which you can measure customer satisfaction. It could be just the CSAT, which is customer satisfaction. It could be the Net Promoter Score, which is NPS, which could be customer effort score, which is the CES. And there's a lot of literature out there on all of these three measures. But getting these parameters right from day one, in whichever way or form, right? You're not, just because you've raised a lot of investor money or just because you have a fancy idea, do not ever get that into a bad zone, right? Because that for me is an area money well spent, because that's literally the first marketing money, right? Customer satisfaction and customer referability is literally the best marketing tool. It is not the amount of money that you go blow up on Facebook or Google. That is the best way to make sure that there is trust built in the brand. That is the best way that you can ensure that there is a lot of positive vibes in the people joining you. Because let's say you're building a brand in India, people that want to join you because they have heard good things about you as a brand from their friends. So when you invest in customers right from day one to build a brand which they can trust, it not just improves a score, which is a customer satisfaction score, it reduces your marketing cost, It improves your overall economics because those same people will come back and buy more. It improves your ability to get smart talent. And so don't look at customer service as just a function. Look at it as a cultural element and make sure that you're getting it right from day one, and do not scale up till you get that right.
The way, the regulations are in India and most of Southeast Asia, is that you have to partner with a bank if you want to become a bank. Right? It is unlike a digital bank license, which let's say Revolut enjoys. So if you look at my global card, it is nothing different from Revolut. Just that they can do on their own banking license and I have to do with a partner bank license. So partnership is a given in India and Southeast Asia. Now, how do you make a successful partnership? So the way, I've been lucky, I've been on both sides of the table. So I understand, whenever I'm going for a partnership with a bank, I just put the banker hat on and say, who is the partner who I would want to partner with? First thing, Amit, which comes to my mind as a banker is that I should not lose my job in this partnership. So the thing, a banking or any partner who's regulated by RBI or any regulator for that matter would be very, very, very careful about with a new fintech partner wants to partner is that, are you KYC compliant? Have you systems built for money laundering, tracking any suspect frauds happening, customer service? It should not land up that the partner banks, mail IDs and call centers are getting flooded by customer service. They will never partner with you. So you have to give them that confidence that you are more than committed towards KYC guidelines, regulatory guidelines, customer service, banking ombudsman, recon, and these things. So that is the first thing which you need to provide confidence to your partner bank. And then starts the commercial angle, Amit, where eventually it's a symbiotic relationship. There are three people in a partnership who need to see value. If one of the three doesn't see value, it is only a very temporary and a fleeting partnership. The partner bank or whoever the partner fintech is, they need to see value. Startup, we need to see value. And the customer. So these three parties, each of them have to see clear advantage.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.